Welcome to Common Ground. My name is Fernando Bossa, and I'm your host today, sitting in for Sheriff Steve W. Thompson. Today's guest is Laverne Gordon, who is the founding president of Love Life Foundation, now Foundation Inc., and she's here with us today. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me, Fernando.
So nice to finally have you here.
I know, it's been a while, right?
It's been a while. So let's begin by talking a little bit about what you're doing today.
Sure. So Love Life Now Foundation is an awareness arm that promotes awareness against domestic violence throughout the year. We don't want the issue of domestic violence to be in the forefront when a celebrity is in the news or when an athlete is, being profiled because of it. We want the issue to be in the forefront as much as possible. So we talk domestic violence awareness primarily through social media and through initiatives and events that we host throughout the year. So one of those initiatives that we actually have coming up is our annual White Ribbon Night Gala. And, I hope this interests you because the White Ribbon Night Gala is centered around a nationwide White Ribbon campaign. And that campaign primarily asks men to be more involved in the conversation against domestic violence. Too often you hear us as women advocating for the cause, but when a man is talking to another man about the issue, it rings home more than it would if it was coming from a woman. So it urges more men to speak up on the issue of domestic violence and encourages more conversation around the issue. So then the gala is focused around the campaign, and it's men talking to the men in the room. Yes, it's a gala. Yes, you get dressed up. Yes, there's dancing and a sit-down dinner and prizes. It's a great night, but we also have a lineup of men, as I said, speaking to the men in the room. Women do attend with their counterparts, but we essentially have the White Ribbon Campaign Coordinator here in Massachusetts from Jane Doe, Craig Norbrook-Baum. He comes and talks about what the campaign means, why it came about. We normally tend to have a man that's doing the work in the community against domestic violence, kind of do an interactive exercise and have the men in the room take the pledge, which simply states, from this day forward, I will no longer condone violence against women. It's pretty simple, but it's pretty powerful. And the women in the room listening and hearing that, all these men standing up, advocating right there and then for this cause means so much to so many. And then we have, we tend to have a local celebrity or someone else that may be using their voice to advocate for the cause. This year, it's actually going to be Chad Coleman, who is been on The Walking Dead. He's an Hollywood actor, and he actually played the role of Ray Rice on Law & Order SVU for that particular domestic violence episode. And he also just recently was on a show called The Arrow. So he'll be flying in to come join us that night. And we also are honoring a gentleman by the name of Craig Martin, who owns an insurance agency on the South Shore, but is so vocal about this issue and uses his voice in any capacity to advocate for no more violence against women. So it's a pretty, compact night in terms of program, but the message rings home for a lot of people that are sitting and suffering in silence.
Well, that's really a good way to open the show up.
Yeah.
I guess the question I'd like to begin with is, yes, you're right. The topic was about women, and now it's changed to men as well. For me, as out there a lot, hearing that this topic has come out, I think one of the forefronts that I got to see it sort of on national television was in football. And so when was that change that really happened that really started to show the difference, that there were also men involved in this? Was there a time, was there a year, period, season that kind of really showed when that shift really took over, or did it just to kind of blend in?
I think it just really blended in softly. Yeah, and softly may not be the word because it really exploded when it did. But it just can't be condoned anymore. We can no longer turn a blind eye to the issue of domestic violence. This issue affects 1 in every 4 women, Fernando. So that's myself. That could be myself, which it was. I am a survivor of domestic violence, and 3 other women. And the problem with that stat is that one of us, or maybe none of us, are speaking up. We are too afraid, we are too ashamed of being profiled when we come out and say, hey, this is happening to me. We're too afraid of being judged and blamed for this issue. And unfortunately, I should say fortunately, we just can't turn a blind eye on this issue anymore. We have to continue speaking up. And it's commendable that, the NFL is taking steps, or have taken steps to, speak up. Because they have a responsibility.
I mean, it's happened in general. I just remember seeing it. That was kind of one of the ones
when your eyes were open.
I was seeing things, and of course some celebrities too, elevators and so forth.
Right, and it just can't be when, like, as I said in the beginning, it just can't be talked about when it's happening in an elevator to a celebrity, or somebody else is being profiled in the news for it. We just can't, because this is something that is affecting men, women, and children every day. 1 in every 4 women, 1 in every 3 teens, and 1 in every 7 men. Men do get abused too, and so. We just have to keep the issue in the forefront as much as possible.
So I imagine that, folks go through parts of counseling, mentoring, one-on-ones, a lot of peer support, education in every which way they get it, job placement, moving sometimes sites to sites. But normally, what does it look like for folks when they're going through those, depending on their case-to-case basis?
The situations.
Really come out and get to the point that where you are now, that you can talk about it, feel comfortable. Is there like a period that it can take 2 years to 4 or 6 years to?
There is no time limit. There's no time gap on what brings a victim from a victim to a survivor, and how long of being a survivor it takes to be able to, like you said, sit and talk about it. It really depends on, like you said, a situation to situation, and all of those components that you mentioned are all saw or seen by shelters. And one of the things that we do, one of the things that we strive for at Love Life Now, is to promote awareness that shelters exist and that there is help everywhere. The shelter that we are actually working with this year coming up is Reach out of Waltham, and they provide all the services that you just mentioned. So when a victim potentially calls their hotline, they are kind of guided towards an advocate, and then an advocate, domestic violence advocate, works with them to kind of see them through the process of safety planning. Too often, the most dangerous time for a victim is when they're trying to escape or leave an abusive situation, because the abuser, in essence, is saying, or how dare you try to leave me? That's them losing that power and control that they've had over this person for who knows how long. And how dare you try to dismantle that? And if I can't have you, no one can. So the shelter really, in essence, helps a victim navigate the process on how to exit safely, how to get back into the regular scheme of things, and help them to really re-enter the world of the living, because they've been closed off and isolated from all of that when they were with their abuser.
Yeah, and I know a lot of this psychological and mental health, disturbs the setting of the family, because then it separates, the young from the father and the mother. And then there's the stories where, like you mentioned, the men, some of the men feel that I've been able to speak to, feel that sometimes they're targeted by their spouse or their other half, and they use that to the better themselves, where then they are easy to pick up a phone and then say, this has happened to me, and it's vice versa, it's happening to him, and so it's much easier to take him away and leave her. But it's very difficult, very fine line, I put. But I'm glad that you're doing this, because it's definitely that kind of support that we need. I can see the passion in you that you're doing this. Before you got there, before you got there,
Yeah.
because we're going to talk about before we end the show, just to, for those that are tuning in right now, just kind of mentioning again about the gala and then maybe where it is and so forth, and people are interested. But what were you doing before then? Because right now you're really like in there. You're passionate about this.
Yeah. It's truly a passion of mine, and I come to this work being a child witness to domestic violence as well as an adult survivor. I grew up on the island of Trinidad, and I lived there for 15 years with my parents and my 4 other siblings. And our normal was seeing our mother brutally beat by our father. And when I talk about beatings, I don't just talk about using your hands and your feet as weapons, but machetes, being chopped sometimes, and beer bottles that he would break and stab her with. This was our normal. Some of the vilest things that came out of his mouth were directed towards my mother. And growing up and seeing that, obviously as a child, you feel helpless. A lot of the times, sometimes he would beat her in the streets, and our neighbors would come out and watch in horror. And I always said to myself, well, why aren't they helping? The men that, communed with him and talked with him on the block, why aren't they jumping in to help her? They know her. They know that the things that he's saying is not true. Why isn't he pulled? Well, guess what? Domestic violence was a normal thing in the 80s, 70s, 60s, and I don't think that the term domestic violence was even coined back then, right? It was just, your wife isn't doing what she's supposed to do, she's going to get knocked off the side of her head.
Family affair.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and so the other guys in the neighborhood, they were doing that in their households too. So who are they to tell him, what to do in his house, right? So, for all intent purposes, he was charming. He was educated. My mother had little to no education. She depended on him as the financial breadwinner and to take care of us and our home. And so she always said, if I took you guys and left, well, what would I do? How would I take care of you? He's making sure that you're fed and going to school. So that was one of the reasons why she stayed. A lot of the times people ask, well, why didn't you leave? Well, no, the narrative should be keep changing and say, well, why are they doing this to them? It's a heavy burden that victims have to carry a lot of the times in silence. So I grew up watching that, and I always said to myself, I would never be my mother. I would never let anybody put their hands on me as my father did to my mom. Unfortunately, for children that grew up in an abusive home, they either grow up to be the abused or the abusee, or the abuser, I should say. And I was no exception to the rule. I grew up and I moved to the States when I was 15 to finish high school. And I met a man by the time I was 21. And much older than me. And we dated for about 3 months, and I thought he did everything that, I look back now and I know now that I was seeing my father in this man, because he was everything that my father was on the outside. 3 months in, however, he slapped me for the first time for something that was trivial, and stormed out. And I caught myself after a little bit, after it happened, and I said, you know what, this is not going to be me. I'm not going to let myself be my mom. And a weekend passed, and I went away, and I came back, and he had delivered a dozen purple roses saying, I'm sorry. And I took that, and I said to myself, wow, he really thought about this apology. My father never did that for my mom. I was comparing situations to make excuses as to why his apology was acceptable. And I accepted him back, and that started a cycle of 2 years of abuse. Because the next time he hit me, he said, I'm sorry again. And it was a really another elaborate apology. And I said, well, maybe, and then I start questioning myself, maybe I should have called. Maybe I should wear a longer skirt. Maybe I should check in with him. Maybe he does need to know who I'm talking to on the phone. We're in a relationship. I shouldn't be keeping quote unquote secrets. And so, all the signs were there, and I chose to ignore them and put the blame and fault on me, because that's the way he made it seem. And unfortunately, people tend to say, well, how could you let yourself, that would never be me. Well, I can tell you, Fernando, could have easily been one of those people saying, and I was, that would never be me. But it's easy to fall in to that type of situation and stay there. Because mentally, you are brought down, you are broken down day by day, and you believe it.
Yeah.
And so after months of hearing that, I believed it. I was 21. I was working at an entry-level job for corporate America. And I was going to Suffolk University at nights, and I had my own apartment. There was no way that I should have been, per se, in this type of relationship, but I was. And so I stayed for 2 years until I got to my breaking point. That night, the last night he beat me, it started from 9 o'clock to 2 o'clock the next morning. And I got myself to a hospital, and in that hospital room, when the doctor came in and started to examine me, we got x-rays, nothing was broken. I had contusions, hip and torso contusions, which means he had punched so hard that the flesh had swollen inside. And so I walked away with my life, but the doctor looking at me saying, who did this to you? Because I'm sure he had seen those type of injuries before. And all I could think to myself was, I don't want anybody to find out. I don't want my job to find out. I don't want my school to find out. I don't want my family to find out. I'm too ashamed. I'm too ashamed to think or to have anybody look at me and say, how could you? How could you let this happen to you after what you saw your mother go through? And so I said, nobody. I covered it up. And he said, I can get you help. And help to me, Fernando, meant going to a shelter. And in my mind back then, this is 2001, my mind back then, a shelter meant going into a big open room with a bunch of beds with a bunch of women that I don't know. And I'd rather face my known hell than to go to the unknown hell, right? And so fast forward to 2010, I took part in 2 beauty pageants. One locally that I ended up winning, and I had to go on to nationals in LA to represent there, and I ended up winning there as well. Well, with 2 beauty pageant titles, I now have to come up with a platform to advocate for the next year. And domestic violence was an easy choice given my history. And so that's where I started with the initiatives that we do now. 6 years later, we're still doing them. But after the year with the titles was up, I knew I wasn't a pageant girl, but I really wanted to continue this work. And I was dead serious about it, no pun intended, but I decided to take a course through the shelter agency that I had wanted to volunteer at, and became a domestic violence advocate, and Love Life Now formed.
Amazing. Amazing, amazing. There was one thing I wanted to ask you through all that, because you mentioned how how you went through the years, and was there? Does a confusion happen where we assume or are in love, that love gets in the middle, so we accept the apologies, and we do give that one more chance because we're in love, and that becomes the confusion of how do I get out, or how do I let go?
Sure. So a lot of the times for victims, we sit back and say, well, first of all, when the first incident happens and the apology comes, you think to yourself, well, that's not the person that I fell in love with. So clearly it must have been a mistake. And for them to be apologizing the way they are, they do mean it. So if you do accept that first apology, you're thinking, this is it, never gonna happen again. And that is so far from the truth, because there's never a just one-time incident. If they did it once, they are absolutely going to do it again. And so you continue down that line. Of course you love this person. Of course you're infatuated with this person. And all you keep saying to yourself is that I want to get back that person that I fell in love with. And if I cry enough, if they see the hurt that they're causing me, at some point they're going to understand that they're really hurting me, and they're going to show up. That person is going to show up. And I'm telling you, if you're listening today, that is never the case. They are never going to show up. That was the honeymoon phase that you went through, and that person is gone. Quite frankly, they were never there. As I said, the honeymoon phase is to reel you in and get you clutched. Right. And once they have you, they have you.
I was going to ask you, and then we'll go back to the gallery as we wrap up. So you being with the siblings in your family?
Yes, four siblings.
4 siblings. So in the siblings, does that also mean that like the other 3 also go through that process of emotional? Do they experience the same lifestyle? Or is it that one person who goes through it and then becomes sort of the model of the family?
Well, it depends. It really depends. Everybody experiences things differently. Right. For me, my experience was subconsciously, well, I was a victim, but subconsciously still falling prey to that type of relationship. My brothers, 2 of them are abusive to their partners. And so that is my father's legacy to them, unfortunately. That's what they grew up seeing. Domestic violence is a learned behavior. Nobody gets up one day and decides, I'm going to beat my wife or my spouse or my husband. It's a learned behavior. And unfortunately, like you said, psychologically and emotionally, it affects people in different ways. And so, yeah, it does hit home differently for a lot of people.
Laverne, can you, as we wrap up, can you please tell me again the day of the gala, the date, and a little information for our viewers?
Sure. So again, the White Ribbon Campaign is a nationwide campaign. I urge you to look it up and inform your family and friends about it, about the ways that you can easily be part of the solution in speaking up against violence against women and children. And so here in Massachusetts, it's the first Thursday of every March is White Ribbon Day here in Massachusetts. Okay. So it's a big to-do at the State House. The governor tends to put on an event that day for White Ribbon Day. And we usually hold our event, the Gala, 1 week before, or at least close to 1 week before. This year it's going to be February 24th, the last Friday. And it's always the last Friday in February at Lombardo's from 8 to 12 p.m. Tickets will be $60. And it's a really informative night.
Website?
www.lovelifenow.org. Each event that we do benefits a shelter to bring awareness to the work that they're doing. And as I mentioned, this year, it's Reach Out of Waltham. Right. So we'll have representatives of Reach there that night, and it'll be a wonderful, wonderful. We hope you come out and join us.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we apologize. I know we're not able to mention prices on the show, but it is a great cause, and I failed to mention that, but go to the website and please support the good cause. Common Ground, we'll be right back.
So I've come up with a family emergency plan.
Great. What is it?
It's difficult to talk about, so I'm not telling you.
How will we know what to do?
You won't.
I'm so glad I won't have to remember anything.
And me too. Thanks for this, sweetie.
Talk to your kids about who to call, where to meet, what to pack. Visit ready.gov/kids for tips and information.
Because I want to be a good example for my son.
Because I want my children to have healthy and loving relationships.
Because we can show boys
they have the power to prevent harm or abuse.
Because you taught me that racist and sexist jokes are not okay.
Because I want to teach my players respect.
Because every boy needs to know that somebody cares about them.
Because strong men don't hide their fears or emotions.
Because I'm not afraid to admit that I was wrong.
Or don't have the answer.
Because no one should fear the person that is supposed to love them.
Because supporting fairness equality, and empathy is what men do.
Men are an important piece of the puzzle to ending violence against women. Let's reimagine manhood.
And we'd like to thank everyone. Happy holiday, Merry Christmas, Feliz Navidad, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for tuning in for Common Ground. Sheriff Steve W. Townsend, and we'll see you next year. We'll have a great line of folks coming on, so stay tuned. Thank you so much.